Yes.
Good morning. So I'm Eric Smith.
Chris Gates.
Chris Gates. And we're here to talk about pen testing from a hot tub time machine. Flashback in time and kind of a focus on things that people probably aren't doing anymore, that they've probably forgotten, and what the value of still doing some of those activities are. So a little about us. Chris and I are partners for Laura's Consulting. We're also penetration testers, but mostly we just look for unicorns. And at the end of the day, we probably just raise hell and cause trouble and make money. So that's good. If you want to find us on Twitter, there's our handles. And Gates has a pretty hefty blog he's been doing for years now. And that's the URL there if you want to go read some of the cool stuff he's done. So a little disclaimer before we start. We're not releasing any O-Days. We're not releasing any tools. So if that's what you're looking for, you can probably find it on his blog. We're not doing any exploits. Everything we show today is going to be things from intelligence gathering to using what you can find without actually running any exploits and still gaining access to systems.
Common misconfigurations.
We're not demoing any lab projects that fail. This is always kind of a big pet peeve of ours. Most of the things that we tend to find that people release work very well in a vacuum against one specific kind of target, one kind of host, one kind of version of software. The things we're talking about here is stuff that generally works across the board with most clients, most systems. Big secret, security isn't sexy. Despite what you may have seen in other presentations or heard across the years, it's not as sexy as everyone believes it is. A lot of the basic shit will get a company compromised. We're definitely not going to be demoing 08067. It's been beat to hell. So if you want to see that, there's thousands of slides out there to go look. And then, like I said before, the kind of the point behind this was a flashback in time a bit to look at some of those things that have been around since the 90s, and then also a bit of a reminder to incorporate those into your methodologies.
So kind of the motivation, see a lot of dirty, scary adjectives. What we've seen over time is corporations are really not getting better, and a lot of things that are really, really old are still getting people owned every day. So things from years and years ago, still very, very frequent. Pen testers as a whole are getting lazier. We have a really, really big over-reliance on frameworks and vulnerability scanners to tell me everything that's wrong with someone's network versus actually going after the network and getting into stuff. And basic stuff will get you owned every time. If you don't test it, other guys will, and I think that's China. You have to test it, and a lot of that basic stuff is not. I gave a whole talk on basic stuff that's considered a low vulnerability that actually gets you owned, and all that stuff still applies. And you need to step away from the scan and exploit mentality. Anything to add?
No, that's it. Like I said before, the whole security is this crazy secret behind closed doors. These are the ways I do it. I'm not going to tell anybody. It's all smoke and mirrors. And at the end of the day, the values you have on your tests, or the results you have on your tests, are going to show value to your clients. So, newsflash, O-Days don't matter, despite what people might say. Why they do matter to us is they keep people on edge. They make them call people for tests. They make them validate things that they're scared about in the wild. In reality, O-Days never seem to work. They work great in the lab, but they fail in the real world. Plus one day sometimes do.
Yeah, anybody, who's a pen tester in here who does that kind of stuff? Couple? Anybody try the Java exploit that just came out? Did it work? Exactly. So there was an O-Day that didn't work, and I tried it because usually, very rarely coincide a fish with an O-Day coming out. And I was like, cool, man, I'm gonna get some people. Put that in, not a single show. So,
yeah,
they're sexy, they're cool, but we never use them. If I had one, I wouldn't waste it on a pen test.
Yeah, at the end of the day, if you drop an O-Day on your client, what are you going to do to tell them to fix it? Pray. There's no remediation path until something comes out. So if there are real O-Days out there that work, there's not much you can really do to show your client, hey, we got it in your network, sorry, deal with it. And typically, if there's exploits already out there in frameworks, vendors already have them to write signatures for. So the whole game of, oh my God, I haven't pushed signatures out to my boxes yet, it's nearly, you know.
Same thing goes for the IE one. Has anyone tried the IE one?
Yeah.
Already, I mean, everything's already tagging that the day after that.
Yeah, antivirus is actually working well now.
that actually works well for that sort of stuff, in my opinion.
So reality check, hackers don't use expensive vulnerability scanners. So why should you rely on those as day one activities? Do the things that are actually going to get a company compromised. They don't use automated pen testing auto-pwn modules and core impacts auto-pwn. They actually do specific targeted attacks. They don't have a scope, they don't have time frames. So they're not going to blow their wad in the first hour of testing. They're going to space it across the scope until they actually get in, and then they get hooks and they stay in. And then they're not going to stop after the first successful exploit, so you shouldn't either. So kind of a breakdown of what today's methodology has been and kind of what pen testing has turned into, because it's becoming a bit of a commodity, is there's very little done on the intel side. There's not much homework done before people actually plug into a network or start an external pen and start firing off scans. The OSINT piece is very vague in most people's methodology. Once they start firing off scans, it's, oh my God, how many exploits can I get to run? How many shells can I get? And then they write up a report. So there's no value at the end of it. It's, here's my scanner results, here's my shells, and they call it good.
Yeah, very vulnerability driven in the end, you do tests that way.
The right way to do it is a lot of homework up front. Do all your intelligence gathering before you even start firing scans, before you start touching a client network. Do a lot of footprinting, understand what they have, what kind of services they have, what kind of environment they have, what their resources look like, what their personnel looks like. Once you've done all those things, the actual vulnerability analysis piece is pretty short. There's not a lot of time wasted on, let's run a scan and wait 4 hours and see if we got any results and highs and purples and reds. And then when you do get to the point of, I have things to go exploit them, and then start showing value. Start doing things that are going to show impact on a network. Spend much more time in the post-exploit phase. You've got hooks in the environment now. What can you do from there? Can you pivot? Can you start getting to the crown jewels of the company that actually shows where their data lives, what makes them tick, and start showing them what the risk is back to the data, not, oh my God, I have 1,000 highs. I have no idea what's actually important to my company, but what's a valuable asset. And then clean up. Hardly anyone does this properly. They have leave-behinds, they leave DLLs, they leave text files, they leave traces of what they've done, they haven't scrubbed logs. So there's too much evidence on the IR side of, you got in and here's how you got in. Touch on any of that? Good.
Just don't stop when you get a shell.
Yeah, major takeaway there. And then also, if people want to go look at details on actually a proper methodology, check out penteststandard.org. It's something that we all started with 400 other people for the last 2 years now. It actually goes through a full methodology of what you should do from pre-sales and scoping with your engagements, talking to your clients, all the way to how to write a proper report. So a lot of good stuff on that site now, especially on the wiki side of the how-to with the tools and steps and things that you should do from a methodology side as well as a procedural side.
How many people do intelligence gathering before their pen tests? It's good. That's good. I'm impressed. It's really the easiest way to learn about a target. You know, before you go after somebody, you want to get an idea of simple things like what they do. So instead of just getting a domain name, you want to know, oh, well, cool, company X makes things, makes widgets, makes this and that. All hackers do it. You should too. And then actually doing it drastically increases your chances for success during attacks. And we're going to go into why that's the case. It helps you formulate your attack plan and your attack matrix of the things you're going to want to try based on what's hanging out there.
Yeah. So what's the value behind it? Obviously, that information's free. You don't have to go pay somebody for it. Someone else has already done your homework. It's either cached in search engines, it's indexed somewhere because someone else has written things like Shodan, places like that. So if the information's out there, it's dumb to not go use it, get it, and try to apply it to your test. Develop a process and methodology around it. As you do that, you're going to be creating a habit that you're going to start following on every test. So make that some of your first steps when you start your engagement, whether it's an external test, internal test, physical, social, whatever it may be. Do it every time. I guarantee if you do those steps every time, you're going to find the unicorns, you're going to find the golden horseshoes, you're going to find to get ways in.
You guys usually, how many zone transfers do you find a year? Like, I'd say for me, I get 1 or 2. That's enough that I have to keep doing it every time because they're still there. That open web dab is there every now and then.
Yep.
Got to do it every time.
Big thing is put eyes on everything. Don't rely on what the output of the tools are showing you. There's no substitute for opening a browser, checking things, see what's available in the browser, see what's available if you actually netcat to the port. Don't just rely on the output from the tools to think it did it properly. The tools can't give you a logical interpretation of the data that you may see.
Yeah, that's probably one of the big ones I got since I started working at Lars is, I'll be honest, I didn't look at everything. I was very vulnerability driven. The scanner said, this is the important shit, this is what I need to look at. And then the methodology that we have here is eyes on everything that's got an open port. Externally, hard to do that internally. Definitely externally, look at everything that's serving, that has a service. And you find a lot of things that are vulnerable to things that the scanner just completely missed.
Absolutely. So takeaway is don't rely on your particular OSINT flavor of tool. Use them all. Use your eyes, use your brain, see what's available to you. Don't rely on the scanners. Don't rely on the output of the scanners because half the time they're full of shit. Start on the external. Start. So some of the things that we do as every time, run these things first, check the data out of it, use that to drive some of your next steps in your testing, is using tools like Harvester. Awesome tool. How many people actually use Harvester? What kind of value does it have? Amazing, right? Find instant data, IP addresses, portals, email addresses, LinkedIn, things that you may not find with some of the other scanners. Foca, awesome tool.
Who uses that? Yay.
Yeah, that's good to see. Foca's evolved a lot. If you haven't checked it out in the past 2 years, they've incorporated a lot of new cool techniques. So Foca's definitely something that should be a day one tool for you. Shodan. Anybody know what Shodan is? Awesome index, awesome database. We found numerous ways in just looking through Shodan.
You can use the API for a lot of things too, with a little bit of Ruby or a little bit of Python. You don't have to pay for things, but if you do pay for them, you can get a lot of data just by querying his API that's free and then getting all that data back out. So it's handy.
Maltego, another great tool set. Perturba's evolved for the last 5 or 6 years now. It's come a long way. There's some new stuff in here that in the new version just got released that we want to show you. And then last that we've always incorporated now, Rob's done a lot of work building Deep Magic. Mubit's put together.
Deep Magic tool? No.
Check that one out.
It basically DNS looked up the whole internet and put it in a database for you to go through and search on stuff. So it's handy.
Yeah, we'll go through some of the results on that one. Aux modules and Metasploit, they're constantly being thrown into the tree. So make sure you stay on top of what aux modules are available to go do some of the OSINT for you. Nmap's come a long way with the scripting engines they have. You can get a lot of information just by running some of the NSE scripts. And then last, don't rely on those things. Write your own. If they're not producing the results that you need, feel free to start looking and figuring out how to write Ruby, Python, some of those other scripting languages. But lastly, like I said before, there's no substitute for what putting eyes and logic into a test is going to give you. Open things in browsers, connect to the ports, see what kind of responses you get back when you connect. That's going to help you determine if the information you're looking at has any value or relevance to your test. And then lastly, you can figure out what kind of damage that has to your client. The tools don't have any idea of what the risk value is for the data you're getting.
Yeah, I think another good example of that is when you pull down all those documents to do metadata on, do you actually open the document and read what's inside? Right? So a lot of times we're like, cool, I got someone's username out of that, but we don't look at the document because there might be actually something useful in that document that can help me later.
So Harvester, simple little output. We did it on one client, Target.
I like to use Palantir because they do all the data gathering on everybody else.
So why not gather on them? Simple little output. Obviously, Harvester has much more stuff you can find as far as reverse lookups and other information, portals you may find. A lot of times we'll find things in Harvester that we just won't find in manual testing. They'll identify things like single-factor portals that we didn't know about. They'll identify dev systems that you may not have had in scope in the beginning or weren't in the IP ranges the client gave you. So look through the hosts that they actually cached in search engines. You'll probably find a lot more than you found in the beginning.
Yeah. So Foca, like I said, there's a couple people who use it. Super handy on the network side of going through doing DNS lookups, Bing lookups, and all the other things that come along with that. And then in turn, it's also really good at document metadata, pulling those things down, go ahead and auto-analyzing the metadata, and then pulling things out by users, computers, softwares that are installed. A lot of times you can get paths and printer names, so if you're ever on target, you need to start pinging things and seeing how the network's set up. A lot of those pieces of information come out of the document metadata.
Yeah, you can get things like server names on the inside. Some of the new features that they've incorporated over the last few revisions is actually doing some attacks with FOCA. You can actually do things like zone transfers. You can look for weak authentication portals. You can actually test SQL injection with FOCA, believe it or not. So there's some things that they've put into it that you may not have tried in the past, that you've probably missed some things if you haven't tried it. Maltego's got some new features. You want to talk about some of that?
Who's used the new Radium Maltego?
Good.
Like a handful of people. It's pretty awesome because what they've done is they've made the addition of machines. And machines are basically that right-click, do all transforms. And they've done that in a little bit of a smarter way. So for simple footprinting, they have footprint L1 through L3 with increasingly more things that they do for each of those. So L3, I mean, is like a ton of stuff.
Macro tasks.
Yeah, especially a macro task to do common tasks for you. Really handy if you guys have a license. It's definitely worth upgrading and getting that.
Yep.
So again, just output, you get emails, you get network level stuff, document metadata, who's connecting to who, all that stuff.
And you can find collusion that way as well. You'll see clients that work together with business partners. So you'll start seeing areas that you may be able to get additional OSINT, not just on that particular target. Shodan, this is just a simple little search we did last night. There's some cool stuff you can do, and you'll actually find credentials with Shodan. A lot of times servers will respond back with weak creds and realms and authentication headers for server responses. So use Shodan to your advantage.
So, and this gets valuable when you use the API, so you can use the API to query the results in Shodan for a particular range, and then if any of that is hanging out, it will percolate out as you run your script on that. So.
Here's a little simple output of Deep Magic. Like Chris said, Rob pretty much went through and did a reverse lookup on the entire internet space. So this works out well if you want to find additional IP ranges for clients that they may not even know about. It may be legacy networks that they thought weren't routable anymore on the internet. So you can actually provide results to clients just by doing this, showing, hey, you've got IP space you should probably include in your script, in your scope.
Old stuff you want to go back and look at archive.org or Google Cache for.
Some additional external OSINT collection.
Yeah, so auxiliary modules, there's a lot of those to do a whole bunch of different tasks. I think everybody knows that. Email enumeration, so there's a couple email harvester scripts, DNS scripts, SMTP scripts. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there to help automate that. And if being Ruby, you can now script that if you can do bash or do some other things. You can kick off MSF CLI and say, okay, for this range, I want you to iterate through all this stuff and check this stuff for me. And you can automate a whole bunch of that stuff with Exploit.
Yeah, the ideas behind it is, the value may not be something extraordinary with one particular script, but use the scripts to your advantage, free up your time. There's no sense in going and doing some of those manual tasks if the script's going to do them for you. But use that time that you have freed up now because the scripts are doing your legwork to actually put eyes, put logic onto it, and interpret if the results are even valuable. A couple of neat examples. This is one that Gates loves to do a lot. The host lookups. We found lots of cool stuff just doing host checks on domains. You'll find things like...
What do those guys use for their spam gateway?
Yeah.
Thank you, very good. So.
And more than likely, you'll be able to determine what kind of AV they have running. Zone transfers, like we said before, they're rare, but when they do work, they're awesome. You get so much data about a client immediately. You start making determinations on where you should attack first. You can prioritize your attack matrices.
Probably add all the quad A stuff too. If someone's got quad A records, that starts to get interesting as well.
Other things you should put eyes on. Look for things like SVN repos. You find a lot of good data in those. You may not find source code, you may not find passwords and immediate access to your environment, but you'll find additional usernames you can use. You'll find file names you can possibly go and access directly. We've had a lot of good success looking at things that would be a low in a scanner that would lead to immediate access to an environment. Directory listing, sometimes it's great information, sometimes it's stupid misconfigurations on web servers. We've seen credentials in directory listings. Credentials work out well for us. Internal IP leakage, this one is something that is always a low in scans. No one ever really considers value to it until you start combining that with internal activities. So if I know that your Tomcat server on the outside has an internal IP of 192 whatever, the minute I get inside your environment, I may go hit that Tomcat system, find out what the creds are because I couldn't pop it on the outside, and use that as a new vector to come back in that wasn't identified from the outside. So you can start finding persistent methods and tying those back to details that you found during the outside that were just low-hanging fruit.
That's your server subnet as well, right? So
Yeah.
place to start.
Bounce emails. How many people actually still send bounce emails when they're doing pen testing? Good. A lot of good email, or a lot of good information you can find from that. Again, you can tie that back to once you do get access inside, tie that back to systems that are available outside for external access still. And then lastly, like we said before, put eyes on everything. If you put eyes on something, you identify some kind of authentication portal, you go do a little research, figure out maybe it has default passwords. It leads to things like, oh my God, I now have access to your supercomputer. I can start doing all my own password cracking on it because I have access to it externally because you left the admin interface open. That turned out really well on a test for us. Anybody ever actually worked on a cray? Yeah. Again, years ago. They're still out there. Awesome when you get access to them. Now all of a sudden you don't have to go pay for GPU cracking in the cloud. Use the client systems.
They like it.
Yeah, they love it when you show screenshots of their own systems.
So using LinkedIn, so Rob Fuller and I gave a talk yesterday kind of using LinkedIn to do extra OSINT and things. So when the slides come out, you can check that out. The other thing that's awesome that LinkedIn does is it shows you who's a new employee of a company. You guys seen that? You go search a company like, oh, here's all the new hires. So those guys are great. They're excellent targets. They're untrained. They've had generally minimal training. They may still have default credentials on accounts that they haven't had to change yet.
They almost always have default credentials.
Yep. And they're unfamiliar with people. So if you're doing social engineering attacks, if you're calling them up and saying, hey, I'm Chris from the help desk, they have no idea if there is a Chris from the help desk. Someone that's been there for 10 years is going to know, there's no Chris at the help desk. I know everybody over there, but
Yeah,
the guy
they've
that's
had lunch with him.
the guy that's been over there a couple months probably won't know that. They'll know the guy that got him started, and after that, probably not.
And they may not be familiar with policies and procedures of, hey, someone's going to be calling you and actually helping you configure some new application that was installed on your laptop, or helping you make sure you got access to corporate
That's
applications.
A big one too, that most places would have a policy that the help desk will never call you and ask you to run some shit. That's important to know, but those guys might not know that. If you have a policy that says the help desk will never call and ask for a password, or the help desk will never call and ask you to run something, they may not know that yet.
And a lot of times you can find policy and procedure sets when you're doing your OSINT, when you're going and using things like FOCA and Maltego and pulling down documents and looking for metadata. You actually get a lot of policies and procedures they publish publicly. Get through some of these now.
Yeah. Anybody use Jigsaw to do harvesting of people? Couple. Man, this thing is awesome. They have just scoured the net and put all this data in there, and you can get tons and tons of information. So Pentest Geek made a Ruby script that does it. Basically, you feed it a domain, and then it can output in a CSV in the correct email format that you want. It's pretty handy. So it's on GitHub. It's free. Run it, and then you get basically it parses what's there, and then gives you a couple different email formats. So it gave you first initial, last name, and then first name dot last name. And I think you can tweak it of how you want it to spit out emails if that's not how the naming convention is.
And once you know their email format, it's easy to take output from Jigsaw and start building your target list of potential usernames. Another big target list for what you're going to use for phishing, social engineering.
All right, so who validates email? Who tries to validate email addresses on every test? Anybody check the mail server to see if it will actually give you an answer on whether that email address is valid or not? Like a couple people. It's supremely useful for only sending emails to valid accounts. We have had clients that said, oh yeah, we saw you sending to all these old addresses that were 3 years old, that those things never go away. They'll come through when you do your OSINT. But if you can check, so I use Central Ops to actually do the first check. You can just put in the email address of the client. Basically, I don't exist. If they're validating emails, you'll get something like bad address, or they'll reject it. And then when it works, you get some level of information, and he actually puts the logs of what happened below, but it wouldn't fit on the screen. So you can actually turn that list into validated and unvalidated.
Yeah, and the value behind that is the less noise you're going to make on the outside, the less chances you have of getting caught. So if you're only attacking them over a spread period of time with valid accounts and valid email addresses, chances are you're not going to raise as many flags if you're sending to old email addresses that they're going to start seeing in logs as bounce backs.
That'll also help you when you go to do brute forcing. Now I'm not brute forcing against invalid and old accounts. I'm brute forcing against active accounts.
So at the end of the day, you've done all these OSINT activities. You started getting this huge pile of data. What's the value of it? You start building your threat matrix. You start building your attack patterns and start assigning some kind of value to those targets. The information you should get out of it is obviously IP ranges and host names. If you've done things like DNS transfers, you're going to get things like server role, server type, possibly what kind of applications tied to those things, possibly what their business partners or who they're linked with. Authentication portals and what kind of authentication types those actual portals use. Email and usernames list, perfect for phishing, brute forcing. Once you get inside, possibly using those to go attack things with weak passwords. Contact information, awesome for social engineering. Geodata about those people and the company. If you're going to be doing physical and red team activities, a lot of that data is going to be useful during OSINT. Credentials, possibly you're going to get those during OSINT. We've had times where we've actually found things where they had credentials in them just by going and browsing websites that we found URLs available during metadata searches. The list is endless. The amount of data you're going to have if you do proper OSINT is going to save you a ton of time when you actually get to an attack phase.
So internal is just as important, and the big thing here is we're making a methodology of going from thousands of hosts into finding those quick things that you want to look for vulnerable stuff. So it's even more important internally to have a methodology for finding all that low-hanging stuff. All the methodology and some of the tools from outside apply.
Absolutely.
The big takeaway from doing it internally is prioritizing your targets inside.
Yeah, and then, aside from running the tools and collecting the data, simple things you can do like looking at DHCP leases, great for getting intelligence about an environment. Looking at zone transfers on the inside. How many people actually try zone transfers on the inside? A lot of times it's ignored. It's great information you can find day one about the environment so you don't have to go and wait and enumerate thousands of IPs. Let the DNS server give it to you.
That's important too, because when you do like NetView, that's going to give you Windows stuff and not necessarily all the Linux boxes, Solaris boxes, and AIX boxes, but the DNS zone transfer will.
Yeah. Packet captures on the inside, great for day one activity. Actually see what's going across the wire. You might get lucky and see creds, and you don't ever have to run scans. You might get access day one just from packet sniffing. ARP, another thing to look at. How many people actually run ARP when they plug into a network? Awesome. So, attack. Oh, where's my China slide at? It's supposed to be China. Attack time. Smart brute forcing. This is something that we evolve with every test. And the days of throwing 600 meg dictionary files at things that are going to lock accounts, put that shit to the side. If you find something that has SSH or telnet open, feel free to throw that stuff at it for the whole test. But when you're testing things like OWA and Citrix and VPN portals, they're going to tie back to LDAP and AD. You're going to get locked accounts if you throw thousands of passwords at it. So be smart about it. Build a generic account list. This is something we've been building for years. Every time you compromise an environment, you have potential usernames that you could use in your next attack. I'm not saying E. Smith and C. Gates, but things like invoices and training and help desk. You're going to develop a nice target list of usernames and possibly passwords that are weak that tie to those usernames. So feel free to start building an account list, not just a password list.
All three of those, we got into stuff this month with.
Yeah, all three of those are valid attacks.
Highly prevalent.
But don't just use our stuff. Go build your own, please.
No, you can't have it.
Spread out your runs. This is something that I think a lot of people don't focus on properly, is don't blow your wad in the first hour of the test. You've got 75, 100 email addresses with potential usernames. Don't go throw 100 passwords with those things. Spread it out over time. Maybe you try 2 or 3 passwords every couple of hours so you don't lock accounts and they actually have time to authenticate again with their mobile device, or they authenticate to an application internally and that counter gets reset. If you start throwing 10 passwords, 15 passwords or something, you're gonna lock the accounts. So spread it out. And then big one for us, and this is something that I want to talk about for a minute, is use smarter passwords. RockUlist and PHP BB and Faith Riders and Elite Hacker and top 100 weak passwords. You may get lucky on those things, but you're going to lock accounts when you get through it. So be smart about the passwords you're going to try. Things like welcome 1, welcome 123, password 1, password 123. Seasons are great. We actually just had a test that summer, whatever worked on. Yeah, yesterday actually. Company name, awesome thing to use. If my company is widgets, I'm going to try widgets 1, widgets 12. You're going to find a ton of users that have company name in their passwords. They may teach their users not to do it, but they're going to have them in their
Have
passwords.
you guys seen that when you do password dumps and things? Is that pretty prevalent?
Yeah, company aim is a big one. And then credit to Robin, he's written a good script that will actually allow you to baseline the tone and the communication that your company uses and go and parse their entire website and find high counts of common words that company uses. Maybe you'll find product names they have. Maybe you'll find things about the company itself they use in language, and that may trigger another 3 or 4 passwords you might create. And then lastly, use the intelligence that you have from the outside. That's going to give you additional information about the company that you could possibly use during your brute forcing. Bottom line, be smart about it.
Yeah, do they make one big product? You may want to try product 1 as well or something.
Or they may have a new project name. Project names have been a good one as well. So, using those tactics, what are some of the great ways to get on the outside? OWA. OWA, love it. Every time we have OWA on the outside, we typically get in. It may take a couple of days, but we get in.
You guys brute force that? Do you look at that as an opportunity to get in, or is that like a no avenue approach? No way to get in? Yes, no, yes, 1. Everybody else doesn't care. Okay. It's a way in. I'd say in previous pen test jobs, I would look at OWA and some other things. It's like, well, there's nothing I can do with that because I didn't have a really good idea of how to smartly do brute forcing. But it's great.
There's a couple of cool scripts that have been around for a while. OWA Brute Forcer Python script works sometimes with 2003, hardly works with 2007. It's broken for 2010. WMAT, anybody know what WMAT is? Great for things like squirrel mail, great for things that are one-off mail clients. The pattern files you can create for those, very simple. All you need is some kind of success variable that you're going to get when you try and authenticate to that OWA portal, and if you get things in there as far as like parsing OWA/off or creating some kind of pattern file you're going to see in a response, you can create a simple text file, use WMAT to fire off attacks against it, and chances are you're going to find it with WMAT. Metasploit has an aux module that was written about a year ago for OWA. Doesn't work a lot of times.
I think the big takeaway from those is you really need to put eyes on and make sure to picking the right tool for the right version of OWA you're going against. Our
favorite, Intruder. Intruder works great. You got to be careful with Intruder sometimes. If you don't have the proper request set up, if they have things in front of it like an ISA server or a forefront gateway, there's going to be additional things in there like a set cookie on every request, every new attack, or every new request you send to OWA. So you got to make sure that your actual intruder attack with burp is set up properly. Pro tip on that, if you do authenticate with OWA and you get a successful login, chances are after that you may have a bunch of 450s instead of a 1950 content length, and it's because a cookie didn't get reset during your attack. So you need to tweak burp enough to request a new cookie on every attack. And obviously the thing you're looking for is major content length change. If you see a bunch of 460s, 470s, and all of a sudden you get a 1570 byte response, chances are you got a successful login.
Or that 302.
Yeah. Talk about that one for a minute.
Yeah. So with I think 2007 and below, a lot of times you can just download the address book. So generally you've brute forced, you've gotten in with you got a handful of accounts that you got. Now you want everybody else. So once you're in OWA, pull down the address book. And now you can go back through with what you did with your passwords. Now I have all 3,000 users to go back through and try that and find that password one. 2010, you actually can't download the address book, but what you can do is click like to show me all the contacts, use burp, scroll through that, and it will actually give you all the post requests. And it's basically giant, long ass XML strings that have everybody there, and you can use burp to iterate through those. So you got down there the SR is the stopping points. You can start at 0, and go through however many users they have. So in this case, 4,000, 100 at a time. Save that, and then use some Python or Ruby to actually go through and parse that stuff out.
Anybody know why going after the address book is useful?
Besides what I just said?
Yeah, well, the result of it, right?
Yeah.
You found welcome one gets you in with a particular user account, but you only had 75 users you were hitting on the outside. Now all of a sudden you have the address book, you've got 10,000 users they have. Go back through and try that one password that worked. Chances are you're going to find another 5 or 6 accounts that may be privileged accounts that you didn't have during your initial brute force.
A lot of times all those generics will be in there too.
Lotus Notes, love it. Who loves Lotus Notes? Awesome. Lotus Notes are great. Whenever we find those, we get a little antsy. If you can get access to the names NSF file, you've got the gold. Names NSF has had a problem for a long time. Notes is yet to address it, even with 8.5 they're up to now, I think. If you get access to notes, you now have access to the names NSF file. Everyone know what has inside names NSF? Password hashes. If you can get one user on notes, you now have everyone's hash for the entire domain or their LDAP database. Then you can take things like John with the jumbo patch and crack against both types of notes hashes you're going to get. There's some other ways to go and do some assessment against notes. Metasploit has some aux modules. Gase has put together a pretty hefty list of files that you can check for to see if they're available without authentication. A lot of times you can get to things like events for and DOM CFG. If you can get to those, chances are you're going to get server names. You're going to possibly get names NSF. You're going to possibly find usernames that might get you in with weak creds. Nmap's got some scripts for it as well. And then,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No,
the big
go
thing
ahead.
there is that Metasploit has the download hashes module.
Yeah.
Works most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So once you have valid creds, it will log in and start iterating through and pulling all those hashes out for you.
And then if not, if you can't get it to work with that because it has broken on us a few times, Burp's got a nice little method to do it as well. My favorite. Citrix. Citrix on the outside with single factor is probably more important to me than any of the other stuff we've talked about so far. If we can get access to Citrix, we've got access to some kind of published application. No matter what Citrix does with their new revisions and all the way up to the latest version of Infuse, they still don't have it right. If you can get one published application, typically you can break out of that application and get shell, drop a binary on the box, get access, start pivoting. A lot of times with no authentication, you can start dumping things like server names and usernames if they actually allow you to enumerate published applications. We've seen a couple of tests now where we've enumerated published applications, and included in that is server names and usernames. So always try and enumerate those things on the outside. Burt does a very good job of brute forcing Citrix. One of the things, you want to talk about that?
The takeaway from that is when you get a successful account, it does set that cookie. And if you don't stop and clear all that, all of the other ones will say failed, even though you've gotten the right password. So you really have to watch for the content link change on those. Pause the scan, basically clear the cookie and continue on, or else you'll miss a bunch of stuff.
And then there's some other tools to assess Citrix on the outside before you even get to the point of rooting. Metasploit's got some aux modules for it. Nmap's got 4 or 5 now to do enumeration against Citrix. There was a great talk given at DEF CON 10 that released a lot of these methods. Still possible to use it. You can still enumerate applications. You can build custom ICA files with a script. Every time it tries to find an application, it'll create the ICA file for you. Ivan, I forgot Ivan's last name. He did that talk. Check out that talk. It's a good talk. And then lastly, use Citrix's software. Citrix's software, the CAG software, will actually allow you to trap an ICA connection, grab the file, modify it, try and break out of other applications. So, once we get access to Citrix, first thing we're going to do is check out the published applications. A lot of the old stuff still works, regardless of the version they're on. You can still break out, you can force browse the system root, you can use the help file search and get access to things. You can even use a new little, or a trick that we've been using for a while now is browse to a directory that has a DLL file. Try and open it with Internet Explorer. It's going to give you a nice little prompt of, I can't open DLL files, what do you want to open it with? Explorer. Now you've got access to possibly the C drive that has the i386 directory. You've got access to possibly the M drive that has it. ICAT, great for Citrix. Everyone know what ICAT is? Kiosk attack tool. Check it out. And then go check out the old talks on Citrix. A lot of the stuff in those still work. Some new stuff that we've been using a lot is using the system information. You can actually not only get information about the Citrix box, but use an open feature within there and start pulling things like Explorer. Our favorite, going after MMC, the Microsoft Management Console. This is something that I've yet to see anyone talk about. I don't know if anyone even knows about it, so if you do, please tell us. Using MMC, you can go through and manage the environment with any Citrix user. You can dump the entire AD forest, see all the groups inside. Once you've seen that, you can start going through those groups and looking for areas that you can actually right-click on it and manage and add a user. I'd say 40% of the time we get access to Citrix boxes, this works. Try this. How many people actually know about that? Anyone ever tried it? Awesome. That's actually cool to see. Yep, so if you can manage a box, you can add a user, add the user to local admin's account. Now you can RDP to that box, drop a bin, exploit it, dump the hashes. Now you've got the local admin hash. So incorporate that into your Citrix hacking. Little access demonstration, MMC access, add the snap in. Oh my God, I can right click and manage boxes, and I can add a user. Good for that.
Yeah, so we talked about smart brute forcing. Basically, if you're not multi-factor, you should definitely take a look at throwing passwords at that smartly.
Yep.
And a lot of times, when you actually guess this, so if you got the Juniper, you got the Cisco SSL VPN, that puts you on the net, and then so if these guys have NAC or all these other crazy requirements, you bypassed all that stuff. Has anybody seen that? You VPN in, you're on the network with everybody else. Very rarely are you in a VPN subnet and only have access to like the 2 servers that you really need when you VPN in. You're on the net with everybody else, bypassing any NAC controls, bypassing any host-based controls that they have in place.
Use external access on an internal pen test. Works well. You've got creds on the inside, but you're locked down to a certain subnet. Use external access of VPN to come in and do more attacks. Some other cool stuff on the outside, we'll go through them quickly. Uploads, WebDAV is awesome. Great ways to put things on boxes. Method abuses, can you actually put files up there, possibly delete them? Remote and local file inclusion, it goes on forever.
So admin interfaces, back to putting eyes on everything. That can actually be pretty challenging of actually getting eyes on everything with all that stuff. So a possible methodology for you is to nmap that range, import those results into Metasploit. Using DB searches, you can pull out the open ports, use some Ruby to make them an HTML file, and then use the Linky plugin Firefox to actually open all those so you can easily look at those things. So it looks like that. Services, import, dump out everything that's open. Use some Ruby to actually make an HTML file that basically says, hey, if I'm 443 or 8443, I need HTTPS. If it's 80, I need HTTP, else give me one of each. For everything, for every open port that you found, use Linky, and it basically gives you a big list of stuff, and then you can open all tabs and then start going through and getting eyes on everything.
Juniper authentication bypass, or 2-factor bypass. Anyone seen this? People actually test Juniper?
Questions on their Junipers or Cisco's? Well, Junipers really.
Yeah. So Juniper has a nice little feature. Not only do they allow username and password, but they'll then prompt you for a second page of enter your secret question answer. Great thing about that, does that look like it's going to stop you? Possibly. What it doesn't do is, as you can see in the URL, it's URL default. You can actually enumerate the default value from 1 to, forgot what it stops at. Yeah. And you may find one that actually changes your authentication page. URL 4 on this one. So enumerate through those. You may find that there's some backdoor interface for them to remotely manage the VPN device and not have to enter a second set of credentials. These are great for doing bypass on the secret questions.
Yeah, SharePoint's awesome. So outside you can do misconfigure, can give you user accounts. If you can guess a username and password, you can do that. Also files. Then internally, once you have everyone's keys to the kingdom are always hanging out in SharePoint. And talk to Chris Nickerson if you want all the dirt on that. We've always find awesome stuff in SharePoint. So you can fuzz things. That list is basically has the SharePoint diggity tools, search lists. Open access gives you access to free stuff a lot of times. User enumeration. Once you have creds, you can actually do a couple SOAP calls to enumerate all the users out of the Active Directory domain.
So we've done all these things, we've got access. Oh my God, you're on the inside. Or maybe you're on the internal pen test piece now. So what do you do next? Enumeration. First step you should always do. But do things like ipconfig, great enumeration tool. You get a lot of information from ipconfig. Much more than you probably thought you had. You get domain controller names, you get domain names, you can start doing lookups against those, you can start enumerating against the domain controllers. You're going to get IP ranges for server subnets. Net commands still work. Awesome for getting information about the domain and possibly about users. If that's not working, do things like dsquery, dsget. People know what dsquery, dsget is? Awesome, check it out. Internal zone transfers. Great way to get more information about your environment. New school domain information.
Yeah, check out Rob's NetView. He dropped it yesterday. It's public now, right? It's awesome. It does all that and more.
Saves you a lot of time.
Yeah, since we're running short on time, I won't go into it.
So like I said before, you're going to get a lot of things about the enumeration of your domain. There's a couple of examples here. We'll put the slides up after. Great way to use DS query to actually go and do things like, I want to find all my Windows 2000 servers.
Shows you all the servers by service pack, so you can look for vulnerable stuff.
User enumeration, again, go get a list of usernames. You're probably going to find weak passwords of those users. You're probably going to find what groups they belong to, who's privileged, who's not. Good modules for it in Metasploit. Kane, awesome tool to still use. Who still uses Kane? Beautiful.
Awesome.
I want to see that. User comment field. Everyone review those? A lot of times you'll find things like, here's all my passwords. They don't realize comment fields are accessible.
Access.
Immediate. Open NFS shares. Great way for intel hunting. Great way to find credentials, usernames, backup files.
That's one of those ones you need to look at what's in it. It may be nothing, or it may be the recorded phone calls for the call center.
Same thing for SMB shares. A scanner's not going to tell you what's in there and what's valuable. Put eyes on it. Go review those open shares. There's a lot of modules and tools out there. Things like enum still works. Use it. Loose permissions on file servers give you the ability to search for things like password or web.config. Find things that can get you access, get you credentials.
Who's seeing world readable on NAS devices for home directories? One person. You should check that, because a lot of them are readable by everybody. So everyone's home directories of all their backups and my documents are readable. That's awesome.
Great ways to move files around in your environment. Maybe you're locked on a device and you can't get binaries on there. Some cool ways to move it around. Clipboard and buffers work well. Remote desktop drive mappings, network map drives, or even external drop sites for WebDAV, even using bits. Great way to move things around on the inside. SQL enumeration always should be something you do off the bat. Find what SQL servers you have. Chances are you're going to find one of those that have weak SA creds. But be smart about it. Check for things like password, SA, or blank. Don't go run the Rocky list against it and lock the SA account. Simple little output from one of the aux modules, Metasploit, to give you what port it's running on, possibly the database instant name you can use for potential passwords.
That's the important takeaway is the TCP port is not always working 33.
Yep. Oracle.
Yeah, so I did a whole bunch of talks on Oracle. If you got Oracle on Windows, it can generally yield you shell if they've got default creds. It can be difficult to get that to play nice with Metasploit, and ISQL Plus doesn't really honor routes. So internal pen test, not a big deal, but outside to inside can be kind of hairy.
Quick elevation, check out GPP.
Who's seen that and used that? You should check that out. If they're setting passwords via group policy, you can pull that out through text.
Now you've got local admin password for servers.
Yeah, it's usually local admin for workstations and local admins for servers.
Then you're going to find things like password reuse. You're going to start owning more boxes. So check out the GPP post module. You may find things like users are part of the domain local admins group on a box. You may find usernames that are similar to DA accounts, and you got password reuse there. So a little recap on the inside. Resist the urge to fire off the scans immediately. You may get blocked, you may get stopped, you may get caught. Use the intel, use the OSINT. Look for things like zone transfers, look at your leases, do things like NS lookups on your domain, use DS query, enumerate what you can, get intel. Check out the common fields, do enumeration on SQL servers. You can use Kane and DS query to find terminal servers, great way to go find tokens. NFS shares, SVN, CVS repositories. SharePoint, great way to go look for things like password. Citrix access, we showed that already, great way to elevate in your environment. File servers, we talked about that, all the things you're going to find there. Great ways to maintain persistence. Sticky keys, magnifier. How about cat password.txt? Or find things like Cisco PCF files. Now I can come in anytime I want because I have your PCF file. Set up VPN and GRE tunnels. How about all user startup? Great way to maintain persistence. And then password one. So, quick question, and then we'll let you guys go. Are you guys confident that all this stuff's been addressed in your environment? Has your last pen test actually found things like that? None of that stuff is patch related. It's all around hardening and password auditing and segmentation and egress filtering and following a role-based least privilege model access. Chances are you probably haven't tested for all those things. That's it. Give some time.
I don't know if there's time for questions.
We'll hang out. We're going to be in the next talk if you guys want to ask any questions.